They demoted me on a Tuesday like it was routine maintenance. No warning, no performance plan, just Brett sliding a single sheet across the conference table while Gloria from HR sat there avoiding eye contact. The meeting invite had said operational restructuring, should have known right then something was off. I'm Wade Sullivan, 51 years old, been plant safety director at Henderson Steel Works in Houston for the past 8 years. Before that, I spent 12 years in the Marines and another 10 years working my way up through various steel plants across Texas. Lost my wife Linda to cancer 3 years back. Got 2 grown kids who turned out decent despite everything. The conference room felt smaller than usual with Brett's energy filling it up. He's 38, MBA from some fancy school, married the boss's daughter about 5 years ago. Real smooth talker, always talking about optimization and efficiency metrics. Problem is, he's never worked a day on an actual plant floor. Brett started talking before I even sat down, used words like realignment and operational efficiency. Said my approach to safety protocols was creating bottlenecks in production flow. Never once mentioned the 0 fatalities we'd maintained for 4 straight years or the $400,000 in liability costs I'd prevented last quarter alone. Then he flipped that paper over. Effective immediately, I was being moved from plant safety director to safety compliance specialist. Same building, same responsibilities, but $22,000 less per year and no authority over critical safety decisions. Temporary adjustment, he called it, while we evaluate structural improvements. I read the memo twice. Generic corporate language about adapting to evolving operational demands without a single specific example. No mention of missed deadlines, failed inspections, or any actual performance issues, just management speak. My pulse started hammering in my ears, but I kept my voice steady. Military training kicks in when things get uncertain. I touched Linda's wedding ring hanging around my neck, old habit when I need to think clearly. Is there documentation supporting this decision? I asked. Gloria shifted in her chair. We'll compile relevant materials and forward them to you. When? Soon, Brett said, already standing up like the meeting was over. That's when I knew this wasn't about performance. This was about control. See, Brett and I had been having what you might call philosophical differences for months. He wanted faster turnaround times on safety inspections. I wanted proper heat treatment verification before any steel left the plant. When he pushed to skip the 48-hour stress testing on structural beams headed for a highway project, I flagged the liability risk in writing. The breaking point had come 3 weeks earlier. Brett blamed my team for a production delay that wasn't ours. I corrected him in a meeting, pulled up the timeline straight from our quality control database. He laughed it off in the room, but later that day, he sent me a message saying I'd undermined his authority in front of the staff. I replied that accuracy wasn't undermining. It was part of my job. 2 weeks before my demotion, things got serious. A new welder kid named Tommy Rodriguez, about my son's age, got hurt because someone had approved substandard welding rods to save $3,000 on the monthly materials budget. Nothing life-threatening, but second-degree burns on his forearms that could have been avoided with proper materials. I traced the approval back to Brett's cost-cutting initiative. When I brought it up in the weekly safety meeting, he said accidents were part of the learning curve in any optimization process. I told him that was unacceptable when we were talking about human beings. He laughed it off in the room but sent me a message later saying I was resistant to necessary operational changes. That message went straight into my files. After that Tuesday meeting, the shock wore off and clarity settled in. This wasn't about my performance. It was about Brett wanting compliance instead of expertise. He needed someone who would rubber stamp his cost-cutting measures, not someone who would slow things down with proper procedures. That evening, I called my old Marine buddy Harold Martinez. He's the union steward for Local 447. Been fighting these battles longer than either of us wants to remember. We served together in Afghanistan, and when I got out, he helped me land my first steel job. They can't just demote you without cause, Harold said. Union contract requires progressive discipline. I'm management, Harold. Contract doesn't cover me the same way. Maybe not, but OSHA does. If they're retaliating because you raised safety concerns, that's federal territory. I hadn't thought about it that way. Started looking at this like a tactical situation instead of a personal one. In the Marines, you don't get emotional when someone shoots at you. You assess the situation, identify your assets, and execute a plan. First thing I did was secure my documentation. Spent that entire evening copying every safety report, every email exchange, every incident log from the past 2 years to my personal drives. Military rule number 1, intelligence wins battles before they start. I organized everything chronologically. Every time Brett had pushed for shortcuts, every time I'd refused to sign off on questionable decisions, every problem that had followed when my recommendations were ignored. The pattern was clear as a maintenance schedule. Gloria's promised documentation took 6 days to arrive. When it finally showed up, it was barely 2 pages of bullet points written in that vague corporate language that doesn't actually say anything. Communication style not aligned with operational pace. Tendency to overanalyze routine processes. Resistance to efficiency improvements. Nothing about my actual safety record. Nothing about the fact that our plant had the best safety numbers in the company. Nothing about Tommy's burns or the highway beam incident. No dates, no examples, no witnesses cited. I read it 3 times, then called Gloria, where in my personnel file is this evaluation stored. It's informal feedback from leadership, Gloria said, her voice getting that careful tone people use when they know they're on thin ice. If it's informal, why does it justify a demotion? Long pause. I could hear her typing in the background, probably pulling up company policy to see what she was supposed to say. It reflects ongoing concerns from management. From which managers, when were these concerns first raised? Because nothing like this appeared in my last 3 performance reviews. Another pause, longer this time. I'll need to check on that and get back to you. She never called back. That's when I started playing offense instead of defense. Filed a formal grievance with HR the next day, citing company policy on progressive discipline. The policy was clear. Disciplinary actions required documented coaching, specific examples of performance issues, and opportunities for improvement. Brett had provided none of that. I also requested my complete personnel file under Texas law. Every company has to provide it within 30 days, and they have to include internal notes and manager evaluations. Most people don't know that, but I'd learned it during a workplace rights seminar the union ran a few years back. Most importantly, I started documenting every conversation with timestamps and witnesses. Started carrying a small notebook, writing down who said what and when. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I wanted evidence that would hold up. The real breakthrough came when Harold and I met for coffee that weekend at a diner near the plant. Harold's been fighting corporate battles for 15 years, and he understands the legal side better than most lawyers. Steel plants fall under OSHA's process safety management standard, Harold explained, stirring his coffee while he talked. If they demoted you for raising safety concerns, that's retaliation. Federal investigators take that seriously because steel accidents kill people. You think that's what this is? Look at the timeline. When did you first clash with Brett over safety issues? I pulled out my notebook and walked him through it. The substandard welding rods that burned Tommy, the highway beam stress testing Brett wanted to skip, the crane cable incident where I'd insisted on replacement and prevented a potential fatality. Every time you slowed things down for safety, you saved money or prevented injuries. Every time he overruled you, problems followed. That's not attitude, that's retaliation for doing your job. Harold was right. I'd been thinking about this as a personality conflict, but it was actually a pattern of punishment for safety advocacy. We spent the next 2 hours building a timeline on paper napkins. Every safety issue I'd flagged over the past year, every time Brett had pushed back. Every incident that had followed when proper procedures weren't followed, the pattern was undeniable. When I'd insisted on proper heat treatment for structural components, we'd caught defects that could have caused building failures. When Brett had rushed approval on questionable materials, we'd had our first recordable injuries in over a year. You need to file a whistleblower complaint with OSHA, Harold said. Not just the union grievance, federal protection. That's a big step. So is letting them destroy safety standards to boost quarterly profits. How many Tommy Rodriguez incidents are you willing to accept? That hit home. I kept thinking about Tommy's burns, about how easily they could have been prevented with proper materials, about the highway beams that could have failed if I hadn't insisted on full testing, about the crane cable that would have snapped and killed someone if we'd used Brett's approved shortcuts. Monday morning, I called the OSHA whistleblower hotline. Didn't file a formal complaint yet, just asked about procedures and protections. The investigator I spoke with, a woman named Patricia Williams, had 20 years of experience with heavy industry cases. Retaliation in steel manufacturing is taken very seriously, she said. Components that fail can kill people, so we investigate every credible report of safety-related retaliation. She explained the process. File the complaint within 30 days of the adverse action, my demotion. Provide documentation of the safety concerns I'd raised. Show the timeline connecting my safety advocacy to the retaliation. Do you have witnesses to the safety issues you raised? I did. Tommy Rodriguez about the welding rods. Janet Cooper from Metallurgy about the pressure to rush testing. Several plant workers who'd seen the results when we'd followed proper procedures versus when we'd cut corners. 3 weeks after my demotion, I filed both the union grievance and the federal whistleblower complaint. Harold helped me organize the documentation, 47 pages of emails, incident reports, safety logs, and witness statements. Every claim backed up with timestamps and corroborating evidence. The response came faster than I expected. O'Shea assigned an investigator within a week, not Patricia Williams, but a guy named Robert Hayes who'd worked steel plants for 15 years before joining the agency. He knew the industry inside and out, knew what questions to ask. His first visit to the plant created immediate ripples. Brett tried to play it cool, but I could see the stress cracks forming. Started CCing Gloria on every email, documenting conversations that had never been documented before. Too late, the absence of past documentation just made the current panic look worse. Hayes interviewed 12 people over 3 days. Plant workers, supervisors, union representatives, even some office staff. Asked about safety protocols, about my performance record, about any pressure they'd felt to cut corners on safety procedures. Tommy Rodriguez told him about the substandard welding rods and how the burns could have been prevented with proper materials. Janet Cooper confirmed the pressure she'd felt to falsify testing reports to meet shipping deadlines. 3 veteran plant workers mentioned specific times when Brett had questioned safety delays I'd implemented and how problems had followed when shortcuts were taken. Most telling was what the old-timers said about me. Wade knows his business, never seen him put production ahead of safety. Guy saved lives with his inspections. Meanwhile, HR was conducting their own investigation. Gloria had brought in her supervisor from corporate, Beverly Stone, who'd been with the company for 18 years and knew how these situations could go wrong for the company. Beverly asked the hard questions Gloria had been avoiding. Can you provide specific examples of performance issues that justified this demotion? Beverly asked Brett during what I later learned was a very uncomfortable meeting. Brett couldn't. His complaints were all about attitude and communication style, nothing concrete, no missed deadlines, no failed inspections, no safety violations on my record. Do you have documentation of coaching sessions or progressive discipline attempts? He didn't. Never had a single formal conversation with me about performance problems. Never put me on any kind of improvement plan. Never even mentioned concerns during my regular check-ins. Are you aware that Mr. Sullivan filed safety complaints prior to his demotion? That's when Brett started backtracking, according to what Harold heard through the union network. Said maybe there had been miscommunication. Maybe the demotion had been hasty. Maybe they could work something out. Too late for that. The OSHA investigation was already gathering momentum, and federal investigators don't care about corporate politics or family connections. During this time, something interesting started happening around the plant. People began talking to me differently. Not openly, everyone was being careful, but I'd catch conversations stopping when Brett walked by or notice people nodding at me with a kind of respect that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, Janet Cooper from Metallurgy pulled me aside near the break room. She'd been with the company 14 years, knew the technical side better than anyone. Brett's been asking me to sign off on materials that haven't completed full testing cycles. She said quietly, looking around to make sure we weren't overheard. Wants me to falsify heat treatment reports to meet shipping deadlines. Did you tell HR about this? I tried, Gloria said. It was a misunderstanding. Said Brett was just asking about expedited testing procedures. This was bigger than my demotion. This was active safety fraud that could get people killed. Steel components that fail don't just cause property damage. They cause catastrophic collapses. Would you be willing to tell the OSHA investigator about this? Jeanette hesitated. She had a family, needed her job, didn't want to make waves. But she also understood what falsified testing reports could lead to. If it would help prevent accidents, yes. I've got emails where he asked me to streamline the documentation process. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tommy Rodriguez, the welder who'd been burned by the substandard rods, approached me during my lunch break. Kid was maybe 28, had a wife and baby daughter at home. Mr. Sullivan, I heard about what happened to you, about the demotion. These things happen, Tommy. Don't worry about it. but I know why it happened. You stood up for me when I got hurt. Made sure it got reported properly instead of swept under the rug. I hadn't realized he knew about that. After his accident, I'd made sure it was logged as a recordable injury and traced back to the material procurement decision. Brett had wanted to classify it as operator error to keep it off our safety statistics. That was just doing my job. Maybe, but most people wouldn't have. My supervisor told me Brett was mad about the paperwork, said it made the department look bad. Tommy had something else. He'd been keeping his own records of safety issues he'd observed, substandard materials, rushed procedures, pressure from supervisors to skip safety steps. Nothing official, just notes in a personal notebook, but it corroborated everything I'd been documenting. 4 weeks after I filed the complaints, Beverly Stone called me in for what she said would be a final meeting. This time she had someone with her corporate counsel, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Margaret Williams. I recognized the name from my OSHA call, but this wasn't the same person. This Margaret Williams was Henderson Steele's lawyer, brought in when companies realize they might be facing federal penalties. "We've completed our internal review," Beverly said, opening a thick folder. "Your demotion didn't follow established company policy. The documentation supporting the disciplinary action was insufficient." The lawyer leaned forward. "We're also concerned about potential violations of federal whistleblower protection laws, which carry significant penalties for the company." I felt Linda's ring against my chest, but kept my expression neutral. Military training, never show your hand until you know what cards they're holding. What does that mean for my situation? Your original position and compensation are being restored. Effective immediately, Beverly said. Your personnel file will reflect no disciplinary action. The previous documentation will be removed. She paused, consulting her notes. Brett Castellanos is being reassigned to strategic consulting. He'll no longer have operational authority or direct reports. Corporate speak for exile, but I understood it perfectly. Brett was being moved away from anything that could affect worker safety. Additionally, the lawyer continued, given your expertise and demonstrated commitment to safety standards, we're offering you a newly created position, Regional Safety Coordinator. It would cover our Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio facilities, report directly to corporate headquarters, and include an $18,000 salary increase over your current director position. The offer was real, but it meant big changes, more travel, new facilities to learn, different politics to navigate at each location. It also meant Brett's father-in-law, Stanley Burke, had essentially signed off on his son-in-law's professional exile. "I'd like some time to consider the coordinator position," I said, "but I appreciate having my original role restored." "Take all the time you need," Beverly said. "The offer will remain open." Walking back to my office, I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph exactly. This had never been about winning or losing. It was about maintaining standards that keep people alive, but there was satisfaction in knowing the system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. Brett's office was empty that afternoon. Security badge deactivated, computer packed up, personal items gone. Harold mentioned later that he'd left around noon with a box of belongings and no goodbye to anyone. Word traveled fast through the plant. By the next morning, everyone knew Brett was gone, and I was back in my full role. The conversations were different, more direct, less careful. People started bringing safety concerns to me again instead of trying to work around them. That evening, I got an email from Stanley Burke himself. Brief, professional, nothing fancy. He thanked me for my professionalism throughout the process and said the company was better for having employees who prioritize safety and integrity. No mention of his son-in-law, no apology for what had happened, just acknowledgement that the right thing had been done. It was enough. The OSHA investigation concluded 2 weeks later with a finding of credible retaliation against me for safety advocacy. The agency issued Henderson Steele a $15,000 fine and required implementation of enhanced whistleblower protection procedures. More importantly, it established a paper trail that would protect other employees who raised safety concerns in the future. Robert Hayes, the OSHA investigator, pulled me aside after the final meeting. "Your documentation made this case. Most people don't keep records like that. Made our job a lot easier. Marine Corps habit. Document everything, assume nothing." Well, it worked. Cases like this send a message. Retaliate against safety advocates, and federal investigators will take notice. During those 2 weeks, I'd been thinking hard about the Regional Safety Coordinator offer. At 51, taking on a new role meant learning different plant cultures, traveling between facilities, dealing with 3 sets of local politics instead of 1. It also meant leaving Houston, leaving the plant where Linda and I had planned to finish out my career. But staying in my current role after everything that had happened meant complications too. Some people would always wonder if I was the guy who got the boss's son-in-law fired. Others might think twice before bringing me problems they thought might cause waves. The new position offered something different, authority that came directly from corporate, not filtered through local management. A chance to implement safety standards across multiple facilities, and honestly, after 8 years dealing with plant politics, I was ready for a challenge that focused purely on keeping people safe. When I called Beverly Stone to accept the coordinator position, she seemed relieved. We've already started briefing you on the Dallas and San Antonio facilities. Your first assignment will be a comprehensive safety audit of all 3 plants, starting next month. That gave me time to wrap up projects in Houston and train my replacement. More importantly, it gave me time to watch how things changed after Brett's departure. The changes were subtle but real. Safety meetings ran longer because people felt comfortable asking questions. When production supervisors flagged concerns about equipment or materials, nobody rushed to override them. The culture was shifting back to something I recognized: methodical, careful, professional. Harold Martinez and I had coffee one last time before my transition. We sat in the same diner where we'd planned my counterattack against Brett's retaliation. "You started something here," Harold said. "Showed people that the system works if you know how to work it right. Just did what needed doing." Nah, it was more than that. "You proved that documentation beats politics, that patience beats anger. That's a lesson this plant needed to learn." During my final week in Houston, the union held a small gathering in the break room. Nothing elaborate, just coffee and cake during shift change. Harold made a short speech about standing up for principles and protecting fellow workers. Some of the old-timers shook my hand with that firm grip that means respect. Tommy Rodriguez came up to me privately afterward. "Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to thank you. Not just for making sure my accident got reported properly, but for showing all of us that someone gives a damn about keeping people safe." His words hit harder than any official recognition could have. This had never been about personal vindication or career advancement. It had been about maintaining standards that prevent people from getting hurt or killed because somebody wanted to save a few dollars on materials or skip proper testing procedures. "You take care of yourself, Tommy. Keep asking questions when something doesn't look right." "I will, and I'll make sure the younger guys do too." The regional coordinator role started 3 weeks later. Different challenges, different personalities at each plant, but the same core principles applied everywhere. Document everything. Follow established procedures. Ask hard questions when something doesn't add up. Trust the system, but make sure the system has teeth. 6 months into the new position, I got an email from Janet Cooper back in Houston. She'd been promoted to chief metallurgist and was implementing upgraded testing protocols across all Henderson facilities. "No more pressure to falsify reports," she wrote. "New management actually listens when we raise technical concerns. Culture's completely different now." That email made all the hotel rooms and highway miles worthwhile. A year later, Harold called with an update from Houston. Safety numbers were the best in company history. Corporate had invested in new equipment and expanded training programs. The attitude had shifted from treating safety as an obstacle to production to treating it as the foundation that made sustainable production possible. "Brett's replacement is solid," Harold told me. "Guy worked his way up from the floor, understands why procedures exist, night and day difference. Good." That's what the plant needed? You hear anything about Brett? I had, through industry connections. He'd taken a position with a construction management firm in Dallas, handling client relations instead of operations, probably better suited to his skills anyway. These days, when people ask me for advice about workplace conflicts, I tell them what I learned from this experience. Document everything, but don't do it out of paranoia. Do it because accurate records protect everyone. Know your rights, but more importantly, know your company's policies better than the people trying to circumvent them. Most importantly, I tell them this. If someone says your attitude is the problem when you're advocating for safety or proper procedures, that's usually a sign you're doing something important. The trick is proving it in a way that leaves no room for interpretation. The truth has a way of surfacing when you give it enough light and enough time to work. Sometimes the system takes longer than you'd like, but when it works, it tends to work thoroughly. And sometimes fighting the right fight the right way doesn't just save your own career, it changes things for everyone who comes after you. Documentation isn't just about covering yourself, it's about building a foundation strong enough that the truth can't be buried under corporate politics or family connections. The real victory wasn't getting my job back or seeing Brett removed. It was proving that when you fight for the right reasons with the right methods, you don't just save your own career, you make the workplace safer for everyone who comes after you.